Internet, and welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. Viewer, if you like what you see here, if you're finding value, please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow. Today, we actually have a very special episode for you, and for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it's our first roundtable. We've actually done a lot of one-on-one interviews. We've actually done 3 one-on-one interviews in particular relating to this story that you see right here on my right, your left. Westword published has been covering what happened at 9 News, a TEGNA newsroom in Denver, Colorado, where 3 Latinas, according to this SEC filing, were among other people within this company called TEGNA who were discriminated against, who experienced racism, who experienced a lot of awful things. And it wasn't just at 9 News. I think it's worth mentioning here. At other TEGNA news companies, there were things like blackface. There were Asian women who were told to westernize their eyes with makeup. This SEC report is really, really toxic. So we are honored, and it is such a privilege to have all 3 of the women who are mentioned in the mantelpiece item for this SEC complaint, which is an essay by Lori Lizarraga, which also ran in Westword. Lori Lizarraga, Sonia Gutierrez, and Kristen Aguirre. Thank you so much for coming back to Meet La Prensa.
Hi.
Hey.
Thanks so much for being back on, Bob. We appreciate all your support through all of this.
Always. And we appreciate your support. We appreciate your courage. We appreciate you for standing up and doing the right thing in the face of such incredible adversity. Now, we've talked to all 3 of you individually about what happened in your newsroom. And what we would love to catch up on now to start off this segment is what's happened since. Like, Lori's essay went live. You 3 were cast into this incredible conversation that was lighting up every journalism chat in the nation about inclusion, about diversity. What's happened since then? What's been, catch us up on what's going on in your lives.
Well, I don't think any of us could have ever expected any of this, right, Lori and Sonia? Like, there's no way.
No, truly. I mean, I'm still getting my head around it 5 weeks later, just how much has happened and how many eyes have been on this piece. I really couldn't have dreamed of how far this would go. 1,500 words really matters, though, not just because of the words, but because of people like you, Pablo, who have given the article energy and created a real movement out of it. You know, it's become sort of this catalyst for change and for giving Latinos more credit and requesting and really sort of more requiring the rights and the representation that we've always deserved, but don't necessarily always have. I feel like we have the power to demand.
So Sonia and Kristen have both now are now with new newsrooms, and Lori, you've been on like the speech making circuit all over the country from the sounds of it, right? I guess a question we got to ask is, Lori, what's next for you? Like after the speeches, or obviously you can continue to give these speeches. These 1,500 words were incredibly powerful and definitely set you up with a platform for. You earned your platform for talking about this more. But when we spoke before, you said you're a journalist and you're going to be a journalist. What are you doing to get back into the journalism?
I was just talking to Kristen about this yesterday, actually. It's difficult to think about moving back into a local newsroom after something like this, just the power of what real sort of grassroots activism, journalism can look like. So what I'm doing right now is enjoying and thinking I'll completely take into my next roles of being a voice for Latinos, representation in newsrooms, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and continue to, contracts aren't signed, but freelancing and doing some, speeches at different large companies across the country. So that'll be really exciting just to share my experience and hopefully help people and companies avoid the circumstances that Kristen and Sonia found ourselves in. But in terms of the journalism, like you said, it is what I love and it's what I'm going to get back into. The question is, how independent do I decide to pursue that in the next market? I have so many offers, which I'm really excited about. If the fit is right at one of those opportunities, then, I'm excited to talk to those newsrooms about that. But I have a feeling it's going to go more independent in the coming weeks. So, Pablo, you'll be hearing more about that from me for sure.
The next Soledad O'Brien, or Maria Hinojosa. I love it. So, Sonia, you told us the last time we had you on about how you were I mean, and this is awful. I give nightmares about this, but you had to give your sources to non-immigrant, non-Latino colleagues just to be able to cover immigration. Like, you're at a new newsroom now, right? Like, you've taken these lessons that you've learned from 9 News, this toxic workplace, this toxic workplace where, you know, immigrants were treated, you know, we're basically, you know, we're never given the respect that they deserve. This sounds like. What are those lessons that you're taking to your new newsroom now, and how are you doing things different?
As soon as, even before I took the job, I had very serious conversations with a lot of the people in management about what they did to recognize, value the worth of Latino journalists on their staff. So even before I took the job, I had very, very tough conversations about, give me tangibles of how you are placing worth on your journalist in the content team. And so that was the first thing. I mean, I noticed that change in myself immediately. And then now that I'm a part of the team, I pitch stories, and I just feel that respect so different with this team. I'm not questioned for silly nuances of the story. Rather, you know, like, we build out the stories for what they can be. And I mean, the results have been absolutely incredible. You know, give a reporter, a journalist, a platform to be authentically themselves, and look at what happens. You know, my very first story with my new station made a huge difference in Colorado school and district and community. My first story. And that comes from that respect and from that worth and that value that a team places on a journalist, and that trust. So it's already been night and day.
Oh, I've said this many times. There's a version of our stories where we bring our lived experiences and all the things we care to talk about to our newsroom. And instead of being on, you know, here 5 weeks after a piece comes out, we're still in that newsroom, and we're still lighting our community up with productive, you know, tangible, results-driven journalism. And that's really the difference, is if you snuff out this kind of energy and this passion and the things that we're experts at, then you create potentially what you have today with the 3 of us. But there is another version of the story where, if we're given oxygen and trust and room to grow and to do what we care about, we just continue to use this energy to be productive and to help our communities. That's really all we want to do. So it's a lesson to every newsroom to remember, you know, how to cultivate a culture of trust in your reporters and caring for what we care about. You know, we really are bringing community issues to light, and we get nothing out of that. So we stand to gain nothing to do the work other than seeing our communities finally get elevated and giving them a voice. That's all we care to do.
And Kristen, you just arrived in your new life.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sonia hit on that. When you can be your authentic self, the whole vibe is different. Your reporting's different. Your pitches are different. Like, when you can really be who you are and they support everything you bring to the table, it's just a whole different work environment.
I love that. So
about little things.
Right,
what would you tell Latinas then? And what are you telling Latinas who come to you about newsrooms that they might be in where they're not allowed, or at least they don't feel that they are supported in being their authentic selves? Like, what's step number 1 toward changing your newsroom, or step number 1 toward embracing your authentic self?
I think don't stop pushing. I think if any one of us had stopped, this wouldn't even be a conversation, right? Find your allies and don't stop pushing for change or whatever the stories you want. Like, it's part of newsroom politics anyways, right? Your story gets rejected a couple times. So I think really finding out if there really is an issue with, like, is that the newsroom politics, or is there really some sort of issue with being a minority that's the problem? Because I was talking to Lori about this yesterday. I had a new manager here say something along the lines of, like, oh, well, we've covered Hispanic stories, you know, before you got here. And I was like, but I was like, whoop, let's roll it back, settle down. Let's not get crazy here. This might be a learning moment. Let's talk it out. And Lori's like, girl, that's the PTSD clicking in. I was like, I know. So before I started an argument, I just kind of, you know, readdressed it, and it was fine, and it was totally done. And I really feel like the newsroom now is very open, and when I first started, my news director sent me an article they did on immigration coverage, and then he was like, hey, like, can you take a look at this? Did we say anything wrong? How can we be better? And I think a newsroom that's constantly looking at how they can be better and really values what their reporters and journalists bring to the table, all of their lived experiences, not even just the fact that I'm Latina, but that I had a disability and that, I went through what I did. Like, it seems like he, from the beginning, was really he wanted me as a whole person, and not just the fact that, I was from 9 News or whatever.
Have colleagues reached out to you from 9 News about, say, maybe to apologize or about how maybe they can be better allies in the future, that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Sonia.
I have a great story about that. So I have a long history with 9. I was an intern there before, so I know a lot of people that worked in that building. And I recently had a conversation with someone who was there for a long time. And he told me, he had such a candid, genuine conversation with me, very apologetic and also reflective. And he was telling me, and this is a white man, who was telling me that he read Lori's piece a good 7 times, and each one of those times he reflected on a different thing in that piece and remembered how he might have been a part of the culture that perpetuated those things against journalists of color, and how he got to a point where he questioned himself and who he was as a person and what he stood for, and how he made sure he stood for those things in the places that he was. And so it was such an incredible conversation to hear from a very respected former journalist from 9 News who was white male say that he has been reflecting so deeply on our piece and our experience, and giving me very specific examples of how, even if he didn't think about it, he might have been a part of those things and those actions against people. So I'll give you an example. He was like, I always wondered why there were so many great journalists that came by here, and then all of a sudden they were gone. And I always wondered that, but I never questioned it. And he said there were also other journalists that came by, and we were all like, oh, well, they definitely need a lot of work. But we would get instruction to rally around that person and make them good no matter what. He's like, and I just have been reflecting on who have been a part of what group. And that has been just so profound for him. And even like I told Lori and Kristen, even if we did that one change in that one journalist, I know that other people who go through that newsroom have that same heart and have that same intelligence to really take this to a level, such a personal level like that. And so he was just telling me how he has taken what he has been reflecting on and applying it to his position now, and trying to make sure that he's more conscientious of what's going on and more supportive in a meaningful way of his colleagues of color.
Which is how change happens, right? Right.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me, like, I still have very close friends that currently work in the newsroom, and they all rallied around me after my stroke. And so those friendships will never be, I think, tethered. I think will always be tightly wound together, or they'll never be severed, I meant. So for me, I had some candid conversations with girlfriends. I've tried to be a safe place where they can ask questions, and maybe, might be scared to maybe ask another Latino, but for me, they can ask me, and, might be ignorant, right? But because I'm a safe place, I can say, hey, this is what this means. And so I've had some candid conversations after the article, like, oh, hey, I had a question about this, about hair, or why was this such a big deal? And I can explain it. And I think for the people that I'm friends with, they genuinely want to be better humans. So having those conversations were important, and now they know better, right? You know better, you can do better. So I would say, for me, an apology wasn't, for me, I don't need an apology for my colleagues, because it wasn't their doing that really set me off track. It was management.
Lori, you are, as the author of the piece that got this whole thing going, have you heard from anybody from 9 News?
I have. I said on a different interview at one point, several weeks ago, and this is more true today, that I think I've heard from more people who I've worked with at 9 than I haven't heard from, ultimately. The pool is much smaller of those who haven't reached out and said something in the form of, solidarity, or in the form of a thank you, or you know, you're teaching me something for the very first time, or I'll take this with me and learn from this, you know, forever. I'll think about you, wishing me luck or telling me, you know, I can't publicly express support because, you know, I'm nervous. I'm still in the newsroom, but I just wanted to let you know that, you know, like I've got your back and I hear you and I appreciate what you've done. I would say, you know, for the most part, I've heard from way more people than I haven't heard from. And that means a lot to me. You know, especially there are those who have felt sort of guilty that they didn't do more, I guess, you know, in the newsroom. And I don't need people to feel, you know, upset or that they did something wrong necessarily. I think just the opportunity to learn from this and do better for the next person, I think that's really a lot.
Is it enough though? There have been some changes at 9 News, obviously. The National Association of Hispanic Journalists president, I think one of their vice presidents, I believe at one point, met with TEGNA, the parent company, and they implemented some style guide changes that sounded to me like they were reflective of some of your concerns in your essay about the coverage of immigration and the language that we use to talk about immigration. Now you're describing that some people are coming forward and saying, I, you know, might not have been a good egg or not as good of an egg as I could have been, and I want to be better. Is that enough?
I think every step forward for helping journalists like me and Sonia and Kristen not fight the fights that I just fought for the last 2 years it's a lot. I mean, every single step toward change is something, so we'll take it. Sometimes it's a drop, sometimes it fills the cup. But in this case, we're taking every single one as a win. I think of myself in the last 2 years of all those fights about stories and being deterred from immigration coverage and the new, you know, standard of immigration coverage, not just in 9, but in TEGNA. That's a big thing. And that means that every journalist like us who cares to cover immigration sensitively and talk about people's status without calling people illegal, they won't have to think about that fight on top of just getting the story out the door and on TV. We're getting the people in the story to share such intimate parts of their lives. So it's already a hard enough job as it is to take away this one part of that battle. That's really, really important. And it's holding the entire journalism industry and media industry to a higher standard and making sure that if you see this publicly, how things have had to change, and you haven't also made these changes in your news organization, you better start toward making them, because this is a standard. And it should have been already, and a lot of people thought that it was. So it really is getting held up to no one can come, you know, below this mark anymore. It's unacceptable. So I definitely take that as a win. Is it enough? I mean, is it ever enough? I don't think enough changes have been made to make sure that we eliminate every single type of experience that Sonia and Kristen and I have had, unfortunately. I think it's going to be a longer battle than 1,500 words can cure. And I think for a company's culture, as we saw highlighted in that SEC filing, a company's culture that has been left unchecked for this long, this is very deeply seated. And the problems run incredibly deep, not just in the newsroom in Denver, but across the company of TEGNA. So that's going to take more people knowing where to look, knowing who to hold accountable, knowing to keep asking questions and making sure, you know, that thing that happened, have you guys made any progress on it? Luckily, we have a lot of people who are eager to do that now that we've sort of uncovered the truth about all of this, or helped to uncover the truth about what's going on behind closed doors. So I do think that there's a lot of work left to be done in the media industry. As far as representation goes at large, there is a lot more work to be done, but we're taking every single step, I think, as a win, and we're keeping it moving forward for sure.
What are the next steps in the work to be done?
What do you guys think?
I've had other journalists with disabilities reach out, particularly a woman, I forget what organization. I mean, we've talked to so many people over the last couple of weeks, but she's helping to start an organization for journalists with disabilities that represent like NAHJ, NABJ, which I think is so crucial, because we've been able to stand behind NAHJ during some of these really tough conversations because they've been able to like protect us, I guess, you know what I mean? And so to have an organization like that, I think for somebody with a journalist with a disability is going to be great to help protect other journalists like that who maybe don't have the voice that I do. you know, as I've said this before, like standing next to Lori and Sonia, I have been able to be more vocal about what I went through. And I don't think it would have been as powerful if I did it on my own a year ago. But being able to hold their hands through this has made me not only stronger, but I feel more free to like share my story. Like it's out there now. Like what haven't I shared at this point? Which was
that
really
gives me
scary
chills
for
to
me.
hear that.
Which was scary for me a year ago, but now I'm like, oh, here's all my dirty laundry. Sift through it. It's here.
I love that. What about you, Sonia? What is the next step that needs to be taken? Not necessarily. I mean, perhaps by TEGNA, maybe let the past be the past. But generally, like the culture of being Latina in the newsroom. I mean, I was talking to Kristen about this in her segment. You know, that you and Lori both basically, if anything, it sounds like a case of discrimination against Latinas, and in Kristen's case, it sounds like the case of discrimination against a disability. So how do you continue to come together and, like Kristen says, hold hands to create this sort of solidarity, this chain, if you will, to organize? Because, you know, I think that like I have been heartened by I've been a longtime critic of the NAHJ, but I was actually pretty heartened that they were, you know, kind of rode in the wake of Lori's and Kristen's courage. And at first I felt like they were just kind of riding in the wake, checking a box. But then it sounded like the conversations became a little bit more meaningful, these harder conversations that they were willing to have. So I was actually like heartened by that. You know what I mean? And again, I wasn't involved in any of the conversations or anything like that. But I do remember, and I was telling Sonia this, you know, I worked at a newspaper that covers Congress, right? And when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was elected, we weren't allowed to cover her. And the excuse was, well, she's a freshman. We don't cover freshmen. But of course we covered Kevin McCarthy when he was a freshman. We covered Paul Ryan when he was a freshman. We didn't cover Nancy Pelosi when she was a freshman in 1984. So I started wondering, is like, was it a woman thing or is it a Latina thing? Like, we don't get to cover powerful women because, I mean, AOC was on every TV station in America, right? So anyway, like it was PTSD for a long time. And anybody who ever told me I wasn't allowed to cover a story, I would lash out against them. And that didn't help my case in any of the newsrooms that I worked in afterwards, right? So I guess, like, you know, what does it take so that people are taken seriously right away, right? Like, regardless of their last name, their ethnic background, their disability, like, how do we make it a culture so that when you come and say, I'm from an immigrant community, I'm covering immigration, I need to push back on this, and you don't need to take it personally, you know, like to the person, you know, like, you know, to your adversaries, right? Like, is this actually, and a question I guess maybe all of you might be able to answer is this wrapping up? Like, is this situation with TEGNA wrapping up, or is it just getting started?
So for me, I actually come from the mentality that I do see that there's a bigger problem. However, I recognize that when you make an issue a bigger problem, the issue and where it started gets away with it. It's easier and it's dismissed as, well, it's a part of a bigger problem. We're working on the bigger problem, just like every other newsroom in the country. So recognizing that is important. And when journalists reach out to me about them having similar experiences in their newsrooms, my very first thing that I do is validate them and tell them, I believe you. I trust that what you are saying is your experience and it's not made up. You are not imagining things happening to you. So to me, that's one of the biggest, most important first steps is validating the experiences that journalists of color have had in newsrooms, because the moment you do that, you recognize what's wrong and realize what's wrong. And you give that journalist that first level of respect that I believe you and I trust you. And please tell me how we can do better. So to me, I think that's one of the first things that needs to happen. Unfortunately, like for me, it's not in my hands to convince people that, you know, my story is true. It's in the hands of others. So for me, it's really important that allies in newsrooms speak up just as loud as we do, because we're going to speak up always. That's who we are. You know, we're going to speak up for our stories. We're going to speak up for ourselves. We also need allies in newsrooms to validate our experience and to elevate our voices and respect them so that the culture in the newsroom changes and respects and elevates and values our voices too. So I think, if anything, it would be a call for allies to help help change those cultures in the newsrooms. And there are allies. I mean, we met them at 9, you know. Unfortunately, though, some of them, there are people that do want that for us and respect our voices and are there. It needs to be a little louder because the aggressions against us are that hard, you know, like, it's just, there's so much that happens. To give you an example, for me, it took Lori telling me what was going on with me to realize what I was put under. You know what I mean? Like, the whole time I was like, oh, I guess this must be what everyone goes through during closed doors, but it's not. It is not. And we need to look out for each other, just like Lori and Kristen, like we have been. I feel the same way as Kristen. Like, every time I feel so strong and so empowered next to these women, because I know that no matter what, they have my back, you know, and I know that, I mean, they are some bulldogs in the newsroom. Let me tell you, like, when we were all working together, we each would come with all sorts of story ideas, defend them to the bone. Kristen, I remember her, she would come in and pitch the same story every single day until they gave it to her. Like, we were those bulldogs in the newsroom, and now to see what happened to them and to me, and that we're together through this, I mean, the power is just incredible, and hopefully that inspires other journalists to ally themselves like we have in the newsroom, and not let it happen until after, you know, after they're gone, because retention is so important. Like, what in the world is the point of bringing in journalists of color if you're not going to keep them and just make it a revolving door?
And I think there is, in the future, you know, in the near future, I'd like to see what the possibility is too of doing, you know, I don't know if it's classes or if it's conversations that just allow other Latino reporters and people in the media to come in and have candid conversations like this about how to be a better ally, because you'd be surprised how many people want to get on board or want to help be a voice and be part of a partnership like this in their newsroom. They just don't know, like, how or the best ways to do that. And then there are Latinos or, you know, any really journalists of color who also don't know how much can they get away with or what should they push for. And I think once the three of us came around each other, we realized the power of, you know, each other's strength, and we felt quite more emboldened to do more with each of our own stories. I think other journalists have that sort of strength, and I think we sort of feel like we're out on an island by ourselves going through these situations in our newsrooms. When in fact, we're very much, and, you know, we're learning more and more that that's just not the case. So I'm not sure, you know, what that looks like, but it does sound like we just need to be, as much as we're in a business of communication, we're not doing a very good job communicating with each other. So it would be good to have an opportunity for us to really share, here's what here's what it took for us to get to this point, and here's, you know, how empowering it's been to come together. And we'd like to encourage other newsrooms to sort of piggyback off of this, because it doesn't have to be a takedown. It really is quite productive. Journalists and reporters who are confident and ready to put this energy out into holding leaders and politicians and elected officials accountable in their communities. If you can channel this energy and this passion, you'll really only get great results. And I'd like to, you know, be able to help with a larger conversation about that if possible.
And I think when you talk about
quick example, go ahead, Kristen.
Allies together. I didn't really even know Sonia was going through all this till Lori told me, and I was like, I mean, for the bulk of this, I was in the hospital, but I didn't know like any of it. I mean, I maybe knew a sliver, but I didn't know how deep what was happening behind those closed doors. Or I most certainly would have spoken up sooner, but it wasn't until Lori's like, "Listen, they're doing this to you, they're doing this to me, and Sonia," and I was like, "What?" So it wasn't until like we all really talked to one another to like figure out that we could be a powerhouse together if we all stepped forward with one, you know, holding each other's hand. But so I think talking about building that allyship with one another in the newsroom is so crucial. And even when I went on this interview here, I'm the only Latina here, which is obviously sad, but that's fine. The first, let's keep it rolling, let's get more in here. But I did initially talk to a female Black reporter, and there's just that like bond you have, you know, like I asked her questions like, really, girl, give me the tea, what's this newsroom like? She's like, oh, you're gonna be like it. And I trust her, like, because she gave me like what it was really like, what's it really like gonna be in that newsroom for me as a woman of color. So I think building those relationships, Laura, you're right, you hit on the head. You got to keep doing that to have a team in the newsroom and be able to lean on each other.
And it's as simple as, I remember in like editorial meetings, like Lori and Kristen would pitch something, and we were the only ones hyping each other up, but we were there. Oh, that's a great story idea. My sources are actually telling me that that's really important. No one else has it. If we do it first, we're gonna be the first to get it. Right. Go get that story. Like that. It's simple things that you speak up, and other people are like, oh, I guess it is something.
Yeah. Right. Totally. You just need one person to be like, hey, I love that story, and then it just keeps rolling and rolling.
Yep.
So we're running out of time. We've got about 4 minutes left. And I've got to ask. I asked you all the first time you came on, and I'm going to ask again. So, and we can go around. We'll go Lori, Sonia, Kristen. But who are the most underrated workers in the American newsroom?
I've met a lot of new journalists. Of course, I say Kristen and Sonia, especially because they're in their new roles at their new newsrooms. And I can't wait to see, it's already paying off, this experience of feeling empowered. I know that they've said, like we have a lot more respect because, of all of this in their own new newsrooms, but it's also that they're putting out a level of respect for themselves and for their lived experiences that they have not yet had, I think. And so because they're owning themselves and all the things that they come with in a new way, I think what they are commanding now is more respect, and they're being sort of called the experts they've always been because they command that attention and that respect. So I'm really excited to see what will come of their journalism with those new sort of found just like emboldenedness and just ownership of their experiences, because they're already doing such incredible work before they were able to really own all these parts of themselves. So of course it's Sonia, it's Pablo, it's people like you, Pablo, who give women like us and journalists like us a platform to continue this conversation, because you bring up questions without this conversation, and we really wouldn't. Okay, like, what are we doing moving forward? How do we keep this pushing? It's been sort of a head spinning experience. So to figure out how to channel it and make it productive, you help us stay on track, because you're constantly asking, who do we go for? Like, who are we gunning for? Who are we holding accountable today? And that energy and that passion, it really does keep us focused. Like, it reminds us daily, people are out there waiting to see what happens next. And while this is still a movement, and while this still has energy, like, we have to continue giving it, the attention, because it's so important. And I've just met so many incredible Latinos on this journey in the last month who have shown just so much support and so much solidarity. So many journalists who have come alongside me and just been so supportive. So I'm just really grateful to all those people. I've been posting them on my Instagram because they share my stuff, and they're on my social media, but there are just so many like new journalists in my life who now I felt like I had a club in me, Kristen and Sonia, and now it's just gotten so much bigger with all of their support. So I really do feel like we're like out here with a squad, and it feels good to not feel alone. I know in a really good way we're not.
I love the analogy to the squad. It's so accurate. Yeah, it's so apt. Yeah. What about you, Sonia?
I'm gonna have to say photojournalists. And I say that because when you walk out of those editorial meetings just feeling so beat and like you just fought the fight of the day, they're the ones that are there with, they're your team. And I say that also, the photojournalists also, because that gentleman that I said that had that profound conversation with me about how deeply it's hit him, he's a photojournalist. And I know that the heart that they have, is just so incredible. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that are like, no, you're doing good. This is great. Like, we're running on great time, and that was good. And, like at the hardest moments, they're the ones that are your team. And they're just, they just do great work. So I say that because of the gentleman I talked to, and because of the experience.
Also wears that title. So we have to share too, that in that great squad is also her husband. So I mean, she's right. That does represent you.
I do want to get specific on one photographer that I know has loved each of us, is Manny Sotelo from 9. He has been like a dad to all of us. I mean, he kind of probably knew what was happening with each one of us just because we would like vent to him so much, but he's Latino, he's a veteran photog, and was just like, every time he saw a Latina, he was like, what do you need from me? How can I help? During my recovery, he would like come in on his days off and help shoot stories for me. I mean, I think he's definitely an underrated photographer there, 100%.
I love it. So Lori, Sonia, Kristen, thank you so much for coming back on Meet La Prensa. This was super fun. Our first roundtable ever.
Yeah, yay! Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. Viewer, if you like what you see here, you can find Lori, Sonia, and Kristen's Twitter handle right here in the description for this video. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. And that's a wrap.